Hello, I'm Debbie Kershaw and welcome to your introduction to soldering. So if you've wanted to solder and you want to know how to do it and you want to know the health and safety practices, the tools needed, the materials needed, you're in the right place. Because in the following modules I'm going to go through everything that you need to begin soldering and just sort of really give you lots of tips and hints so you can be really confident at the end. And during this module as well, we're going to be making two projects. So we're going to be making a stacking ring, so a basic band ring, and that will involve one solder joint. And then at the end, we're going to really go for it, and we're going to do more than one solder joint. So we're actually going to solder on a solderable element to the top of that stacking ring. So by the end of this, you'll have loads to be practicing, and you'll be able to solder hopefully confidently and safely. So let's get started. In this section, we're going to be talking about your basic soldering setup. So where you do it, health and safety, the basic tools that you need. Obviously, you could keep buying tools forever and ever for your metalsmithing journey. But to start out with, you don't really need a lot of tools. And the ones that you do need, I'm going to talk you through. And I think we need to really discuss, to start off with, the health and safety. So you will be using a torch with a flame. So you don't want to be using this anywhere near anything that can get in your way. For example, curtains that could blow in your way, or material, or a tablecloth. It wants to be a nice free area. It needs to be well ventilated, and you need to have lots of room around you so that you're not going to get caught on anything. Having said that, you can pretty much solder on any table or surface as long as you've got a heat-proof mat. Now you can buy heat-proof mats, and we do them here at JewelleryMaker, but I tend to use a good old baking tray. So a baking tray is just something that you can set up your soldering station on, and then you can move it around should you need to. So I wouldn't recommend that if you've not done this before, you put the tray on your best coffee table. And you wouldn't want to put your tray on any material, on a cloth or a dining cloth. You want it to be on a flat surface and a safe surface. So let's get down to your basic soldering setup. What you need to solder is a torch, and this is a Durston torch that we sell here at JewelleryMaker, and it's a small torch, and you might have seen them used before for things like creme brulee, and this is a little bit more powerful, and this is all you need to get started, is a small jeweler's torch, and there are different makes on the market. And how we fill this up, it's just basically lighter fluid. So when this is empty, you fill it up with the lighter fluid. I'm going to show you how to do that when we come to the torch section, and I'm going to be showing you your right way around the torch, what the buttons are and everything else to do with that. So you need your torch, you've got your baking tray. The next thing you need is a fire brick. Now, a fire brick is a heat resistant, you can see these have been very well used. This is a heat resistant surface, and anything that we're going to solder goes on here. Now, you can make do with just one fire brick to get started with. I've got a couple here just to show you the different sizes and the different depths as well that you can get on these solder bricks. It's quite a nice idea if you get a larger one and then you pop a smaller one on the top, but it just depends what you're soldering. So you've got your heat-proof surface, you've got your fire brick, you've got your torch as well. Now we're talking about health and safety, so before you even start, you need to make sure that you haven't got any sleeves or any clothes that are going to get in your way. An apron is a good idea. Now a jeweller's apron is usually sort of suede or leather, and this is for a reason. If you get any metal or hot sparks or anything coming away or at you, then it will hit your apron. It's not going to go through your clothes, it's not going to get to your skin. It's also really good for keeping clean as well, because metalsmithing can be a bit of a dirty job at times, and this will just keep your clothes clean and you safe. Now the things that we use in most of our metalsmithing, it's really good practice to get used to using a mask, because you don't want to be breathing in any fumes, any liquids, any sort of dust from your metal. Not so much with soldering, but it's best practice that when you get into your studio that you do use a ventilator mask. Now there's different ones on the market, and this is one where you can actually change out the filter, so any sort of nastiness gets caught here in the sides on the filter. Now I'm not going to be using one today, because so you can hear what I'm saying, because you're going to need to hear what I'm saying, but I am in a well ventilated space, but I would recommend one of these. Also, I'm wearing my glasses, so I don't need them necessarily, but some eye goggles are also really good for protection, because again, if anything comes flying towards you, sparks or pieces of metal, anything at all, your eyes are protected. Now, I've got long hair and it's firmly up. You don't want your hair to be in your work, so get any hair and anything off of your face, any scarves, just common sense really. Make sure you've got lots of room around you to work. So once you've got your health and safety practices into play, let me move the mask out of the way there, and you have got your fire brick on your table, you've got your torch and your heat-proof surface, there's a few other things that you're going to need as we go along to make our piece. Now, you're going to need some sort of flux, and flux is a liquid that helps your solder to flow. Your solder won't flow unless you flux your joint, and I'll show you that when we come to making. Now, flux comes in a couple of different mediums. You can get the liquid flux, so that is already liquid, or the one that I think most people have started with is the good old borax cone and dish. So if you think pestle and mortar, it's a cone of borax, and all you do is add some water, grind it, and it actually makes this white paste so that you can then take your paintbrush and just paint this onto your solder joints, and I'll be showing you that when we actually come to make our ring. So two types of flux there. Choose whichever one. If you're not sure, then maybe get the borax cone and the dish, because I think that's where most of us start. Now, obviously to solder, you're going to need some sort of solder, and solder comes in two different ways, well, three different ways really. You can get wire for solder, you can get paste. Now, if you've never soldered before, paste is really easy, because when you use your paste, you don't need to flux because it has flux in it. It's also quite sticky, so it's quite good for sticking to your metals. So if you're a beginner, solder paste is really quite good. It doesn't go flying everywhere when you solder, and it can really increase your confidence. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be using the solder paste in our second demo. In our first demo, I'm going to be using pallions, which is what we mainly start off with. So solder pallions start off like this, and you have soft, medium and hard. And what this means is the soft will melt quicker, the medium takes a little bit longer, and the hard takes the longest to melt. The reason we need this is if we're doing multiple solder joints, and I'll explain this more when we come to solder, then, and you've already soldered one joint, you don't want the one that you've already soldered to pop open when you're continuing to solder on, so I'll explain that. Now, we don't use these as they are. We get our snips and we snip them up, and I'm going to actually open this, I don't know if you can see, into these tiny wee, and they're called pallions. So they're tiny little squares of metal, and you can adjust the size, and we only really use one of those when we're soldering something. So you can see what I mean, that when you're adding one of these, it could easily fly about, or you can put too much flame on it, or it can move. So this is a little bit more difficult to use than the paste, but still really, really easy once you get the hang of it. So there are different, you can get extra easy solder, easy, medium and hard, but really to begin with you just want to get a hard, a medium and a soft. So we've covered our fluxes, we've covered our solder. Let's talk about some of the other tools that I think are necessities for starting out. You're going to need a good pair of tweezers, heat-resistant tweezers. Now, these tweezers are for basically picking up any hot metal, moving it around. Never want to touch any hot metal with your fingers. So a nice long pair of insulated tweezers are a must. You can also get the tweezers that are reversible, so they'll hold on to things for you. And something that I find really irreplaceable, I use nearly all the time, is a third hand. So it's just a little stand, and all of these things are available at JewelleryMaker, and it will hold something a little bit higher up. So that's really, really important. So selection of tweezers there for you. And then last but not least, we need a solder pick. And what a solder pick does, it moves our solder around, and we can sort of maneuver things with that without touching it with our hands. So let's see, is that everything? I think that's everything that we need for our basic setup. Now, when you finish soldering, you need to clean your metal. Sometimes your metal will become fire stained or get a level of dark patina on it, and we need to get rid of that, especially if we're going to solder again, because you can't solder a joint that's dirty. And you need some pickle. And safety pickle comes in a powder, and you add water to it and you heat it up, and then when you finish soldering, you pop your piece into the pickle, and it then turns the piece clean and white. Now, I haven't got any pickle in here today. Usually I'd probably have it full a little tiny bit. I'd put it up on high until it's hot, and then pop my piece in the pickle. Now, you can't put your usual stainless steel tweezers in the pickle, it will contaminate it. So you would probably need to get some plastic or copper ones. So plastic or copper, and just keep them next to your pickle pot so you don't forget and you don't contaminate the pickle. So pickle pot, and then last but not least, you just need a quenching pot, which is water, just plain water in a little pot, so that when something's hot, we can pop it in there to cool it down straight away. So let me have a look, make sure that I've told you everything. Yep, I think I have. So that's just showing you around the basic tools that are needed. There are lots of other tools as you go along your journey that you might want to add in to make different things, different projects, make your life easier. But this is really what I think is the basic setup that you need for soldering to start off with. So let's move on. In this section, we're going to talk about using your torch, because really your torch is the most important thing, and flame control is very, very important. How you use your flame determines whether your solder joint is going to work or if it's not going to work. It also determines if you're going to melt your piece. We've all done it, and actually it's a really good learning experience, because if you melt something, hopefully not something you've spent 2 hours preparing, you then learn what metal looks like when it melts. You get an idea of metal colours, and we'll go through that. Let's just talk about the sort of things that we can solder. We can solder wire, sheet, and these are the common materials that we usually use within jewellery making anyway. Now, these can be brass, this can be gold, it can be copper, silver. I would say the main things that you use when you're starting out are copper if you're practicing, and then often you'll remake something in silver just so that it's not so expensive. But I'm just going to show you. So we often have lots of different metal sheet in lots of different thicknesses. So this really depends on what you're making, and you don't want your sheet to be too thin, but equally you don't want it to be too thick. So this is a unfinished sheet, and we can tell that because it's not shiny, it's just the silver as it comes, and you can see the thickness there. Now, this doesn't only just come in unfinished, it comes in high shine. It also comes, you can get sort of different textures in your metal sheets as well. And you can get any sheet, you can get brass sheet, you can get copper sheet. Copper's a really good way to practice. It does behave in a slightly different way to sterling silver. So if you have never soldered before, it's quite nice to use copper, but also you can go straight in with your sterling. That's absolutely fine. And just start as you mean to go on. It's completely up to you. You can also mix metals. You can mix your copper in with your silver as well. That's absolutely fine. And then if you think about things like rings or bangles, we usually use different shaped wires. So your basic band ring, so like my finger ring there that you're seeing, that's just a beaded wire. It's just a length of wire. And so if you think a wedding ring, that's a D-shaped wire. A bangle, this is all wire. Even these chain links have been made using wire and soldered together. So most things can be made with either jewellery wire or jewellery sheet. And what soldering does, it will take two parts of jewellery or more if you're making a multiple soldered piece, and it will permanently fuse the metal together. And you need your solder to do that. So in order to solder, we need to use our torch. We need to know how to use it, we need to know our way around it, and we need to know flame control. You're not going to learn everything today by watching this, but hopefully you will have enough confidence to go away, try for yourself, and with trial and error and practice, you'll get used to it. So let's have a look round our torch. I'll just move the metal out of the way. So torches can be slightly different, but they're generally the same. You fill them up with lighter fluid, so your torch will come empty. And if you look on the bottom, you have very similar to when you fill up a lighter, you have this little point here. When you're filling up your torch, you would hold your torch upside down. So I don't think this one's completely full. Take your fluid, just as you would with a lighter, and press down. And you will know when it's finished because it will start, sort of a little bit of smoke will start coming out of the top there. Right, so mine was almost full. And then often you will just pop that down on the surface and just leave that to settle. And that actually, a full torch will last you quite a while before you have to fill it up again. So it's as easy as that to fill up your torch. Now at the back here, we've got this dial, and this is a flame control. So it will make my flame either go larger or smaller at the front, and I'll show you that when I light it. This is a trigger which actually lights my torch. Some of the inexpensive torches you have to light yourself with a lighter, so you would turn the gas on and then light it with a torch, but this one has a trigger, and I would recommend that actually, especially if you're starting out. It's less things to think about. And then at the side you've got a locking mechanism, so you can actually lock your torch for health and safety reasons. And that's really all you need to know about your torch. The next thing we need to talk about is the flame. So I wouldn't light my torch anywhere near anything that I'm going to aim at that could cause a problem. Thinking about when you're starting, sometimes you'll be aiming your flame at your metal, and then while you're concentrating, you take your flame away, and you're pointing over here. You need to make sure that you turn your flame off when you're using it. You can always bring it back to your metal. So let's light up our torch. So I'm going to just turn the gas on. I'm just turning it a little bit, and you'll hear it go. Hear that? And then trigger. And I've got my flame. Now it's a bit more difficult to see in the studio the flame, and you will be able to see the colours of your flame much better when you're at home in your natural light. We've got very, very powerful studio lights. As I turn my dial at the back here, I can turn my flame up, and it will get hotter and a bigger, bushier flame, and I can turn my flame down and it will go slightly cooler and not as bushy. Now, as you can see there, the point of that blue point of the flame is actually the hottest part. And when you start playing at home, you'll see that beyond that blue, under normal light conditions, there is a longer flame, a longer yellow flame that's a little bit washed out in our studio here. Can you see it? Yeah. And then to turn it off, you just turn the dial all the way, and that is off. So I think before you do anything, just practicing turning on the flame, turning off the flame, that you comfortably know how to do that. Now, talking about flame control, anytime you think that you've had your flame on there for too long and it's going to melt, you can take it off. You can always put it back on again, but you can take that flame off. And what you'll find is you'll get used to what colour this metal goes when it's about to melt. So usually we would heat it up to an orangey type colour if we were annealing our metal, just to soften it, but to actually solder, we'll usually take it up to a cherry red colour. If your piece is vibrant red, it's about to melt, and the easiest way to see that is to actually watch it in action. Okay, so I'm going to take that large piece out of the way. Now also, we all have different definitions of colour, don't we? So what I think is cherry red, you might not think. So you need to just practice. And you can do that with a piece of copper or a piece of scrap silver or upcycled silver. Get used to your metal colours. And when you've been doing it a while, you'll think, oh, it's about to melt. You'll be able to tell. Okay, so I'm going to heat up this piece of metal, and I'm going to try and talk you through the colours, and then I'm actually going to melt it so that you can see how long it can take to melt metal. I'm going to turn my torch on, and I'm going to have a medium flame, so not right up and not right down. So I'm turning on my gas, lighting my torch, turning it up slightly, and I'm just putting my flame on my metal. So I don't know if we can come in on the metal, so I'm just going to take it off a moment. So my metal now has gone quite orange, and if I was annealing, I'd take my flame off straight away. If I was soldering, I'd probably take it to there, bright red. Now if I leave it on for longer than that, let's see what happens. So there, look, it's melting. that didn't take long at all. If I keep my flame on it, it will melt into a little ball completely. So if you think liquid mercury, liquid terminator, that's what can happen to your metal. Once you have finished heating your metal, don't try and touch it while it's glowing because it's still soft and you need to, like, it stopped being glowing now, so I would just take that off my fire brick and pop it in my water, and you'll hear a very satisfying quenching sound, and that will go into the water. So if you've spent a long time preparing a ring band, I'm really excited, I've made my first stacking ring. When you solder it together, you don't want to melt it. If you do, it's a learning process, it doesn't matter, but you will get used to, as you go along, the colours that your metal goes, and you'll know. Torch control is all about thinking, nope, taking the flame away, taking it back, knowing what temperature that you need. And I'll show you that when we come to our stacking ring. So I'm just going to heat this larger piece of metal once more so that we can get some idea of, and see if you can see when you think it's going to melt. So I'm turning this on. Trigger, I've got quite a low flame just so it melts a little bit quicker. So I've got no colour on this so far. Now I know I'm at about annealing temperature now because I've got an orange coming off of my flame. So if I wanted to anneal, make my metal softer so I could work on it, I know that I could take my flame off now. If I wanted to solder, I know that I need to basically go red. Now there we go, red. That's your soldering temperature. If I kept it on there because I was like, oh, I don't know if it's gone, then you'll know if it's about to melt because the top will start to go shiny like that. Can you see that corner? Can we get that on the overhead? There we go. Can you see how it's going shiny? I know that it's about to melt into a puddle on my fire brick. And this is what we don't want to happen. As you can see, it's really, really red now, really orange, and it's just gone into a puddle. And I think most people that have worked with metal have had that happen to them at some time when they've been learning. I think it's really valuable to actually take a piece of metal and get it to completely and utterly melt so that you can see what the colours are and when it will melt. And you'll get used to that and you'll be able to work out, oh, I need to take my flame off now because it's going to melt. So having a little practice with your metal and with your flame before you start to make anything is really, really beneficial because practice makes perfect, and you'll get very used to when to take the flame away, when to turn it up, when to turn it down. So are you ready to make something? Should we put all of this into practice? And I think it will make more sense when we actually start to make something. So in the next chapter, we're going to make a basic band, a basic stacking ring with one solder joint. In this section, we're going to be preparing your joints for soldering. So we're actually going to be making something, yay, not just me talking. We're going to be making a basic stacking ring, and I think a lot of us have started with this. It's something we love to wear, we love to stack, and of course when you can make a basic stacking ring, you can make a bangle because you just use thicker wire and make a bigger size. So let's get started. What I'm going to use for this is some 0.8 or 1mm will do, sterling silver wire, which comes on a reel like this, and there are some equations that you can use to make stacking rings and exact measurements, but I'm just going to show you the beginner's way to make a stacking ring. You need one of these, which is a ring mandrel, and it's got the sizes on. So if you know what size ring you want to make, then you just look here, and this one's got the letters and the numbers depending on which country you're in or which sizing that you use. So what you want to do is take a length of wire. So I'm going to take a longer length than I need and just cut it from the spool. And what I want to do is I'm just going to have a look on my ring mandrel of the size that I want. Now it's always better to work a little size down because you can always make it a little bit bigger than make it too big because it's harder to be small. So let's say we're going to go for an NO. I'm going to go right down on the end. So I'm holding my finger here and I'm just going to take my wire around, nice snug fit around my ring mandrel, and where my wires cross, I'm going to take a Sharpie and just mark where I want my join to be. Okay, now I'm not going for an exact fit here because for demonstration purposes. And then you want to get some flush cut pliers, or you can saw through this if you want to, and just take away your excess wire. So what you're left with is a nice round ring shape. Now what you'll often find when you cut the wire is that your corners here are pointed and you need them to sit really, really flush together. So if you open out your ring a little bit, you might need to take a file and just file this join, and you'll file it and then you'll keep looking up until that join looks flat. And then the same on the other side. If you saw this, it's usually a better, or a flatter join, should I say, or if you use flush cutters, that will be a flatter join. And you can tell because you wiggle your ring, and it doesn't have to be really round. If you're taking out the round shape at this point, it doesn't matter, we're gonna get it back again. And we're just going to put that join together. And usually you can tell if it is flush, because if you hold it up to the light and you can see light through it, then you might have to file that a little bit more. But that's all you have to do for your stacking ring. Okay, so now we're going to solder it. This is the exciting part. So you can't solder plated metals because you'll take the plating off. It needs to be either fully silver or fully copper. If you are trying to solder a ring that is gold plated silver, you'll solder off the gold plate and you'll end up with the silver. So stick to just one metal at this point. So I've got my ring here that I've made earlier, and my join is so flush that I can barely see where it is. And you know, you will take a few minutes to make sure by wiggling forward and back, and you'll hear a very satisfying click when it clicks into place. So I'm going to just pop that onto my soldering block. Now this is where we need to choose what kind of flux we're using, and I'm going to go with the traditional flux. I'm going to go with the cone, the borax cone, and the dish. So you need to just add a little bit of water into there. So if you think pestle and mortar, it's very, very similar to that. And then you just grind around with your borax, and you'll see a little white sort of milky paste start to form. And it's usually at this point when I'll choose my solder. So I've got a solder pallion that I've popped in there. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. And you just want to remove that with your tweezers. So because it's in there, it's nicely fluxed. So I'm just going to take my solder pallion and I'm going to just pop it on my brick. Now it's going to be very hard for you to see, but it's just my little solder pallion is here, and here is my join. So you need to make sure that this join is clean. So if you've had your fingers all over it, you might want to just take a bit of a sanding block and just give that a little sand and a little clean, because solder does not like to flow across a dirty solder joint. So then you just get your paintbrush and you're just going to paint over the join, front and back, and you can see this because it's white. Your flux, and I'm going to just add a little bit more water to that, just because I've been talking, it's dried out a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water, because you can never really have too much flux. It protects your metal from fire stain. Going to get a little bit more of that liquid, and I'm going to flux. So I want to get the join exactly over the top of that solder pallion. Now I am not at a usual working angle here, I am under the lights, but excuse me if I get my head in the way, but what I'm going to do is just make sure that I'm going to move that around so that my join is exactly over my solder pallion. Okay, so my little solder pallion is right underneath where that metal meets, and we're going to solder that. And what we're looking for, you'll see the flux start to bubble up, and when it starts to bubble up, you know that it's soon going to be soldering point. And then I'm going to take the flame equally all around the ring. So I'm not going to aim it just where I want it to flow. I want an even heat all around. And then when I get to the point where I think it's going to go, I'm going to aim my flame here. Now I'm not going to use a really harsh flame. I'm going to have my tweezers nearby in case I need to move anything while I'm working. I'm going to move my water to the side so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to have got my solder pallion right underneath where those two wires join. I've got flux on my solder pallion, flux on my ring, and we're now going to solder. So you'll see me, and the reason I'm telling you now is because it's more difficult to see under the studio lights. You'll see me equally heating the whole of the ring. When I think that my solder's about to flow, you'll see me concentrate my flame towards the join itself. So I'm going to do a medium bushy flame. So I'm going to turn on my gas, turn on my flame, and then I'm going to just take my flame and heat up my flux. You'll see it start to bubble up. Sometimes your silver may move and you might need to get your tweezers and actually move it back into place. We seem to be all right. And then I'm just going to heat the whole ring band. I'm taking my flame away here and there just to make sure. And now I'm going to concentrate on the join, and there it goes. So what you'll see is right at the join, you'll see when we melted the metal, you'll see that sort of thing happening. You'll see that the metal there will become liquid and the solder will flow up through the join onto both sides. Now usually before I do anything I turn it over and make sure that my solder's gone to the other side, and it has. So it's literally that quick. You're better to use less of a flame and keep taking it away and keep introducing it than go in heavy-handed. So I'm going to lift that up, mustn't touch it with my fingers, pop it in my quenching pot, and now I can touch it. So if I hold that up to the camera you'll be able to see. So you see the darkening of the metal there, the sort of dirt in the metal. That is just a bit of fire stain. And what I would usually do at this point is pop that in my pickle pot for a few minutes, and it will get rid of all of this darkened stain that you get when you solder. And so when you're finished, I know that that solder join is good. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit of extra solder, and you can just clean that up with a sanding pad. So I'm just going to pop and grab my sanding pad here. Rather than buying different grits of sandpaper, these nail buffing blocks are really, really good to start out. I still use these now. I used them when I began. And what you can actually do is just buff over the top and remove any solder. Now usually I would have put this in the pickle so that that discoloration won't be there. And then once that solder joint is ready, you can then pop it back onto your ring mandrel. And I usually use a ring mandrel for this that doesn't have the letters on, one that I can just bash. I've got a rawhide mallet here, so a rawhide mallet or a nylon hammer, any hammer that won't mark your piece. And then you can start to hammer this all around gently. I'm just making sure that I've got that perfect round shape that I need. I then take it off because obviously it's graduated, tapered, pop it back on again and do the same again. And that's my stacking ring. Now, of course, you will want to polish, file and polish that. You won't have that stain on it because yours will have been in the pickle, but obviously for demonstration purposes, you will end up with something that looks very much like this once it's polished up. So you've got your lovely stacking ring. If I show this camera here. So the other one on my thumb as well has been made using a different type of wire. So that is all there is to that. Now you will need to polish that to bring it up to a high shine, which we will be covering in the section on polishing, filing and finishing our jewellery, but that's all it takes as far as soldering. So that's one solder joint, and what I used for that joint was hard solder. Now hard solder, it has a melting point which takes the longest, so that if I add something else to this and I use medium solder, then this solder will flow before I ping this joint open. Okay, so in the next demonstration we're going to talk about when you want to solder more than one joint and how you do that. So how easy was that? You've got a stacking ring. Practice makes perfect. Let's move on and actually solder something onto this ring. In this section, we've soldered one solder joint, but what happens when you need to solder two or more? Why doesn't the first one pop open? Well, that's where your solder strengths come in. So if you have soldered especially when you're getting started, if you've soldered your first joint with hard solder, then that's going to take longer to melt. So if you do subsequent joints with either medium or soft solder, then they will have melted way before your first joint melts. And that is why we have those different types of solder, and I hope that makes more sense when we're actually working with it than just talking about it. So in the last demo I used the solder pallions, which we cut into tiny little squares, if you remember. In this one, and I do find that this is much easier to use, tends to be a little bit more pricey, but it does last a long time if you look after it. This is solder paste. Now there's a couple of really good points about this. When you actually syringe, you're very in control of how much you use. It's like a sticky paste, so whatever you add it to, it tends to stick to, which sometimes with the pallions, if you're not very used to your torch, you can send your pallions flying or have to reposition them, and that puts you off. So as a beginner, this is pretty good stuff. Usually when you try this, you don't often go back to pallions, but you know, everybody's different, everybody likes different things. Also, this has already got flux in it, so you don't need to add flux to your joins. You can just pop your paste on and you're good to go. So when I say more than one joint, what do I mean? So let's have a look at this. So this is the ring that we made in the last chapter. And usually I would have popped that in the pickle and you wouldn't see that dark stain. It will all be nice and clean. So what if I want to actually solder something onto the top? And what I've got here is something, maybe we can have a look on the overhead. It's a little daisy, and we do lots of things like this at JewelleryMaker that are ready-made. Now, you could make this yourself by sawing it out of some silver sheet and using tools on it to make it into a flower. Lovely. But if you're not at that stage yet, then you can buy these solderable elements, they're called. It means that you can use them to solder. They will take heat. Some of them even have stones in that don't mind you adding a little bit of heat to it. Now, I would always add this away from my existing solder joint. So I've left this one for you to see. My existing solder joint is down here. So if I want to solder this on the top, I'm going to go across from it. That way, if I needed to resize the ring later, it would be easy to open it and I'm away from my original solder joint. Now, you can add some extra protection on your solder joints if you're not confident. There are products on the market. This is one of them that we do here at JM, and it's like toothpaste actually. And what you do is you just take a little bit of that paste and you pop it onto the joint you've already soldered. And what that does is it insulates that joint and stops it from popping open. But I think it's really good practice to not use this and try and solder it without using this, so you get used to how long you need to solder. The main thing with something like this, it's a more complicated setup, and usually most of the time is spent actually setting up rather than actually soldering. So before, we just laid the ring flat down on the solder block, but with this we have to find a way for our ring to stand up and for our little flower to sit on the top. And again, this needs to be a really flush connection. So the top of this ring is round, so only a little bit of the metal is actually going to go onto the flat part. So what I need to do before I start, I'm going opposite my joint. So let's use this one. It's not been in the pickle, but we'll see how we get on. Is to make a little flat spot at the top there so I get maximum contact between my solderable accent and my ring band. So I'm just using a needle file here. You could use some sandpaper, and just in one direction only, I'm just going to file a little flat part. So this is actually round wire, so it's round all the way. Keep having a look, and then you might want to file it the other way, just so that I've got that little flat part for it to connect to. And I'm quite happy with that. So I've got a little flat part at the top there. So the easiest way that I found to do this is pop your flower down on your fire brick. I'm actually going to move it over a little bit, and this is where this comes in really handy, my little tweezers on my third hand, because what I'm going to do, and I'll show you before I actually set it up, is I'm going to pop my ring in here. I need to make sure, so you have to look at it from all angles and make sure that your tweezers are exactly in the right position, because what we're going to do once we are happy is we're going to drop this down onto our ring, and we're going to solder or in a great position. Now at this point I need to look and I need to make sure that that is exactly where I need it to be. So I've got my head over the top and I'm making sure that it's straight, it's halfway down, that I'm happy with the positioning, I'm getting down on the level of the ring, I'm making sure that my ring isn't tilted, all of those things. So take a few minutes to do that. When you are pretty sure that you've got an idea, move that away and take out your solder paste. Now what you do, it's just a syringe, and ooh, that came flying out because it doesn't usually do that because I've been transporting it today in the car, but there we go. So you just want to pop some solder paste, and you might need, whoops, you might need your solder pick to just get this solder paste exactly where you want it. So I'm just going to take a little bit more because that came out because it's been on the move. There we go. I'm going to pop a bit of solder paste on there and then just move that out of the way. So I'm just going to tidy that up a little bit. So I'm going to move all the solder paste into the middle where I want the join to be. So on this flower it's quite simple because you can see exactly where the center is, but maybe if you sort out something else, you could make a permanent marker dot where you want your solder to be to make sure that you've got it in exactly the right place. I'm going to keep my solder pick nearby in case I need to move anything, and now I'm doing it for real. I'm setting this down. Now what I tend to do before I put it actually on the ring, I make sure that I'm happy that it's not tilting, and then I put it down so that it's flat. It might take a minute. It sits flat. It will in the end, but it's not a 2-minute job. So you need to take that down. So when it sits on your brick, you know that it's pretty much going to sit on your solder paste. So we're going to pop that on the solder paste. There. Make sure your positioning is right. Make sure that I've got solder paste underneath. It's on both sides, so I've got my head around it. That's slightly tilted, I can see from the camera angle, but we're going to go with it. You will take longer to make sure that you're happy with absolutely everything. At this point, if you're thinking, oh, I need a bit more solder, you could take your very fine nib and you can just add a little bit more solder onto there, and you're ready to solder. Now, we need to talk a bit about heat sinks. Now, because you're using your tweezers, they're a heat sink, which means they're going to absorb some of the heat. So we're going to want to actually heat those tweezers as well. Now, the paste that I've used is soft solder paste because the first join I did was hard. So this soft solder, in theory, should melt before the other one, so I'll be fine as far as my first join is concerned. So I'm going to heat up my torch, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do and then I'll show you just because of our lights. I'm going to be taking, you've got to decide which has got more metal in. I'd say this is about even, there's probably more metal in the ring band, so I will be heating the tweezers because they're a heat sink, heating my band, and then heating my flower. And what you need to do is bring both pieces of metal up to the same temperature, and then the solder will flow. So if you find that you see the solder flow on your flower and it's not flowing on your band, then take your flame to your band, heat that up, and then heat them both together. This does take practice. I'm making it sound really complicated. It's not. It's just practice and getting used to what it's doing. So should we give it a go? Okay. So I'm going to have a medium bushy flame. I'm going to heat up the tweezers, heat up my ring band, and then I'm going to take it down onto my flower. Now I'm keeping my eye on the solder paste for when it will flow. And now I'm going to take my flame and just really concentrate it in. And I'm taking it away anytime I think, oh, that's getting too hot. And with the paste, sometimes it's not as obvious when it flows. I'm just going to give that a bash and then a bit more on the band. And I think we're good. So the moment of truth, let me move the torch out of the way, is when you lift that up, if it's still attached, then you've got 2 solder joints there. So I don't want to touch that because it's hot, but if I turn it that way, you can see that you've got a really pretty soldered stacking ring, and you have got 2 joins. So you've got, and I deliberately left this join so you could see it. I've got the first join, which I did with hard solder, and that is completely intact, that hasn't popped open. And then the second join I've actually done with soft, but I could have used medium. So this one flowed way before this one, so we're all good. Also, when you add your tweezers, I just pop them down, they are protecting a little bit this top part. But if you do find that your first solder join pops, don't worry, put it down to experience. You'll have a better idea of when that might happen next time. It's something you really need to get in there and do, and it's such fun. So when I finished with this, I will either let it cool down naturally, or I will find my tweezers, here they are, and I will quench it into my quenching pot. There's probably not much heat left in there. And then I can have a really good look around it and see, just make sure that the solder's flown right the way through to both sides. I've got a really good join on there. So look how pretty that is. Let's pop that on. It's not finished at all, but you can see there that I've got a really pretty stacking ring. So what I would then do is pop this in the pickle, so that will get rid of any of the fire stain, any of the flux that might be of burn onto there. It will leave it sort of a white colour, and then you're ready to move to the finishing stage. So the finishing stage is the filing, the polishing, anything that you need to do to take that rough piece of jewellery to a finished piece of jewellery, and we will be covering that in our future sections on filing, finishing, polishing, etc. But I hope that we have demystified soldering a little bit for you today. You don't need a lot of big workspace, you don't need a lot of tools to get started, and you can start off making basic bands, basic stacking rings. Everything that I've used, all the tools and everything that you might need, is available on the JewelleryMaker website, so have a look on there. We've also got lots of tutorials on our YouTube channel and on our website of all different jewellery making techniques. So this concludes our introduction to soldering module. I'm Debbie Kershaw. Thank you so much for your company, and I really hope that you enjoy getting started and really getting into this hobby, because it's absolutely fantastic. And I will see you again very soon.